Hi, this is Alex, and if you love music, you've come to the right place because we're all about albums. Today we're going to talk about the anatomy of an album. The album is composed of several parts. The main part that we see is the album cover. The album cover is also known as an album jacket. The album cover is composed of paperboard. This paperboard protects and surrounds the record or the CD. The cover is made of a single piece of cardboard which is folded and then glued, which then protects the record. On the cardboard then album art or photographic images were placed. The image that was placed originally was glued on. This is called tip-on. Later on in the 1980s, it was directly printed onto cardboard, and this was called direct-to-board. Now, this was a cheaper process. However, a lot of people complained because it did have a slightly different feel to it than the original album, and when you buy vinyl, you want everything to be perfect, so a lot of people like the older albums. Many times when a new album is being re-released for an anniversary edition, the cover art will be tip-on so that it is the same as it was originally. This does increase the cost of the album you're buying. At the beginning, there were wax cylinders producing music, which was Edison's invention. However, the other major player was shellac, which was in 78 record format. And this did win out. And in 1910, 78 RPM albums were the norm, and they were either 10-inch or 12-inch. The 78 RPM records were sold with simple brown paper or with cardboard, and they typically had a hole cut out in the middle so you can read the record label. The albums were very fragile, and so better protection was needed. In the 1920s, they started selling collections of empty covers, and this was much like a photo album that people bought, and it was either made out of paper or out of leather. This later became known as a record album. In 1938, Columbia Records hired its first art director, and his name was Alex Steinweiss. He was credited with the concept of album covers and with cover art. By 1948, albums had become the new norm, and they were sold in either 10-inch size or the 12-inch size, which is what we know of today. By the 1950s through the 1980s, albums were 12 inches in size. The covers were slightly larger, and the standard was 12.375 inches so that the record could fit within the album cover. When CDs were introduced in the 1980s, they also had a cover. This cover was 4.75 inches in size, so the images were obviously smaller, but the album art and/or photography still persisted. The original packaging for the CDs was known as a jewel case. Later on, this turned into a combination of cardboard and plastic, which we know as Digipack. Today, digital downloads or streaming still contain album art. Additionally, there was a gatefold cover. That is a fold-out which would contain photography and/or lyrics or other items within the middle portion of the album. When you close the gatefold cover, it closes to the size of a standard album cover. The gatefold album was used to hold multiple albums. The first gatefold cover to contain multiple albums was Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde. This album came out in 1966, and when you open up, you can see additional photographs of the artist. Some examples of some interesting album art includes Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti, where you have the sleeve and you can slide it through some cutouts in the record. In the 1960s, the Rolling Stones didn't want to be outdone by the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's album, so they had a 3D image pressed on the original album cover art. Nowadays, they just have it a plain photo. Finally, this is an album by Ambrosia, an album from the early 70s to mid 70s, and this is at the time when there was pyramid power. You can actually see that you can take the album cover and fold it out and actually make a pyramid. So that was kind of cool. Here's another very famous album. This is the Dave Brubeck Quartet from 1959, Time Out, which is one of the best-selling jazz records of all time. And this is a gatefold cover. And obviously it has some nice photographs, you see. I want to draw your attention to this picture here. You can actually see the pianist, which is Dave Brubeck, with Paul Desmond as a saxophone player. Then you see the bass player, and finally the drummer. And this is exactly how you hear the album when you listen to it on stereo. It's what's called the sound stage. And you can hear the musicians spread across the stage. And this is exactly how you hear them, with the piano and the saxophone to the right and the bass player and the drummer to the left. So you can actually glean a lot of information from photographs. The next portion of the album is what's inside the album cover, which is the album sleeve. This is what houses the vinyl record, and its function is to protect the record and keep away dust. This became also known as the dust sleeve or the album liner. The album sleeves were mostly made out of paper, but they can also be made out of rice paper, as well as other components, including anti-static wraps. Some of these sleeves even contain an inner lining to help protect the record further and prevent dust accumulation. Much like the early 78 RPM records, these sleeves do have a central cutout, again, to be able to read the label as well as the album title and the song titles, as well as to determine which is the side 1 and side 2, or side A and side B. The sleeve can have several appearances, the most common being a plain white appearance. However, it could also have album art, it can have colored paper, it could also contain liner notes, as well as advertisements. Here are several examples. This album has the plain white album sleeve with the cutout. This album contains additional album art. This is a famous album, Hotel California by the Eagles, and this contains liner notes on the sleeve. And finally, this is a reproduction of an old jazz album, and here you can see this sleeve, which is made of an anti-static paper, which is very important to protect your records. It is known that the white paper sleeves can damage a record face. So if you want to protect your vinyl, I would recommend getting these anti-static dust guards. These anti-static dust sleeves are readily available, and I will have some links below so that you can check them out if you want to protect your album collection, which I do recommend. The third portion of the album, which is a critical portion actually, is what's known as the liner notes. Now, liner notes come from originally concerts, such as orchestrated concerts, where you would get a program, and within the program they would describe the piece that you were about to hear. These liner notes are commonly seen today within the album sleeve, or possibly even on the album cover, but more commonly on the gatefold cover. The liner notes for CDs are contained within the little booklet that comes behind the cover art in the front of the jewel case. Later, when CDs were made of cardboard and opened up like a mini album, they had also liner notes which would slip out of the CD case. Early on, liner notes many times contained an essay written by a music journalist or the artist themselves to describe the album, its meaning, and some explanation of the songs. This is only found today usually in music compilations or special box sets that are produced. Liner notes more commonly contain lyrics as well as discography, the musicians, what instruments they may have played on each track, as well as the engineer and the recording company. Now, why is this all important? The liner notes give you more information about the album, not only the lyrics, but also the musicians who played on the album, which would give you an insight as to the quality of the musicianship. The liner notes are also very important for music collectors. By knowing the recording engineer, the record label, and the pressing plant, you can make sometimes a decision as to the quality of the record, even though you may not know the artist or the band. For the digital downloads and for streaming, there are services such as Gracenote and Rune, which are available, which can give you the information about the artist, as well as the musicians and other interesting facts about the album. And finally, there are what is known as inserts within albums. Well, inserts are anything contained within the album cover other than the album sleeve. You can find on the insert some posters, additional photographs, lyrics. More recently, a lot of the albums contain digital download cards as well as their insert. Here are some examples of some inserts. Here's a more common insert. This shows the album lyrics. This you see quite commonly today. Here's one that's a little bit more extensive. This one shows additional photographs, but when you open it up, it actually not only has the lyrics on this side, but on the other side it actually has an explanation of the songs, as well as a description of some of the exotic instruments used on this album. So this is quite a nice insert. And finally, one of the most famous inserts of all time is from the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. These are this many cartoonish looking things that you can actually cut out and use. Actually, if it's intact, it's obviously more valuable, but back in the day you didn't know, so people just cut them up and used them for fun. Well, let's move on to our unknown album. And now for the unknown albums from the last video. The first unknown album I showed is this one, which is Kacey Musgraves, and this is her album from 2018 entitled Golden Hour. Now, this album won several Grammy Awards. It not only won the Album of the Year, it also won the Best Country Album of the Year. The second unknown album is Beck. And this is his album, Morning Phase, which came out in 2014. This is a great record, and this album, when it came out, is said to be sort of a follow-up to Beck's 2002 album, Sea Change. And you can see when you listen to both albums the similarities in the style of music presentation. This is a great album, and it won Album of the Year in 2015. Okay, well, let's move on now to this week's unknown album. So here's the first unknown album. Okay, hope you got that one. Here's the second unknown album. Great. I will reveal the answers on our next video. If you think you know the answers to these unknown albums, please put them in the comments below and I will let you know if you got them right. As always, this is Alex from All About Albums. Thanks for listening. Have a great day, and remember, keep them spinning.